Welcome to another episode of The Art of Feminine Negotiation. I'm your host, Cindy Watson, and I'm excited to introduce you today to Sally Raymond. It's great to have you here, Sally. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Cindy. This is a pleasure. I'm already really excited about this.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this conversation. And for our listeners, we're going to be talking today about negotiating life past suicide and the power of EQ. So for those of you who don't know her, Sally Raymond's a psychotherapist. She's been in practice over 30 years. She's an EQ coach, an author, a certified distinguished speaker. Her eldest son's suicide at only 23 years old catapulted Sally into authoring The Son I Knew Too Late, a guide to help you survive and thrive. It really tugged at my heartstrings, and I definitely wanted to share her story with you today. And I have no doubt you'll be able to get some really valuable gems out of this. So, Sally, to kickstart, I often say that our first and most important negotiation is with ourselves, negotiating our mindset. And I cannot imagine what it was like to carry on after the suicide of your eldest son. And again, my heart and love goes out to you. If you don't mind, I'd love if you could share sort of from your experience, how were you able to negotiate to carry on after that experience? I think our listeners could get a lot of value from that.
Well, thank you for that, Cindy. There's no way to survive the loss of a child. The mom I was realized that I'd missed his pain, and that was intolerable. Yeah. And I was just halfway through my licensure as a psychotherapist.
Yeah.
That even 100 million times worse. But at that moment, I would say that woman died. There was no way to survive it. Not with the understanding I had at the time, because I had blown it. And I couldn't face it. I couldn't live with it. And I've heard of other parents who's had their children suicide, also committed suicide right after. And I totally understand why. And even though that part of me died, I couldn't see any sense in doing the same, because I had another son and I couldn't leave him stranded. Yeah. And I also, with the new tools I had just been given, had to find out what his story was. I had to find out what I had missed. I had to find out every single thing I could in order to really reconnect with him again in the only way I could, and try to make sense of it for myself so I could understand what had driven him into this impossible situation.
What was the age spread between the boys, Sally, if you don't mind me asking?
Oh no, it's really critical, Cindy. They were a year and a half apart.
Yeah.
I was trying to get over it as fast as I could.
Yeah.
And so the two weren't close, but John was a genius. He was reading it too.
Wow.
He
was a prodigy.
He was teaching calculus at 14.
Wow.
At 16, he was invited into Carnegie Mellon in theoretical math. And in 4 years, he finished both his bachelor's and master's simultaneously.
Wow.
So his little brother couldn't possibly compete with someone older who was such an outstanding kid in every way. None of us could.
Yeah.
I couldn't either.
Yeah. Now, I want to circle back for a moment, because when you were describing sort of your reaction, if I may, I heard a lot of sort of guilt and self-blame there. And I think that's quite a normal reaction. And as parents generally, we often do that, let alone in exceptional circumstances. So I'd love if you could share some of the tips for our listeners about how you negotiate past that, right? What are some healthy ways that we can negotiate past our self-blame and guilt in circumstances in our life?
Well, absolutely. What I did is I realized that he had put me on a mystery. I had to solve a mystery. I had a job to do, and I had to honor his life in a way that would help others survive what he didn't. It was all I could do. And so first I had to save my own life, because when something like that happens, it hits your whole body.
Yeah.
and I was having precancerous conditions and all kinds of horrible things. And first I had to heal my life. And so one of the things I did, actually my boyfriend did at the time, he took me to an aerobics class, and I sat there looking at these girls. I was in such a horrible state, and I was looking at these girls dancing for no reason, going nowhere, wasting so much time and energy on nothing. And then it dawned on me that my job was to dance for no reason.
I love that. That's
And it
beautiful.
really, I went into that class, and I started out, and being put back into an energetic system, a life affirming system where you have to learn certain moves and move with the people so you don't hit everybody.
Yeah.
And then hearing the music, and you know, this is all about life, and it helped ground me, it helped heal my body. And so that was one of the things that that came to me that really, really brought me back to being present, being alive, being more vibrant, and realizing that there was more to the story. And the other thing I had to do was my home was full of all the memories of my son. And everywhere I looked, every floor, every surface, outside, inside, and they were just full of a mausoleum of his death.
Yeah.
And I couldn't live in this house without being just assailed for the rest of my life by all these horrible memories. And so what I did is I became a tile setter. And
That's an
I
unusual approach.
and I took every surface that I could, every floor, every bathroom, every the outside, the patios, everything, and I reset the tiles in color and light that would turn his life, his home, from a mausoleum full of death to a celebration of his life.
That's
And that is what I did, tile by tile by tile. I'd pick the colors, I'd pick everything out, and then I had to set it myself. I had to do the work with my own hands. And at the same time, I went and I looked at the yard, and I just had it completely raised. I took everything out, everything just back to dirt.
Yeah.
And I redesigned the yard in a way that would, you know, make this home come back to life in a new way. And as I was doing that, I was coming back to life in a
Yeah.
new way. And so those were some of the things I did to bring to help me through this moment, help me reset my life, reset my son's home and experience here in a new way. And then after that, that's when I started doing the retrospective of looking for the stories I
Yeah.
must have missed.
And
And
just
that,
before we get there, I want to just recap for our listeners and make sure, because I think there were a lot of gems buried there in the telling. And thank you for sharing with us so vulnerably. Appreciate that. One of the things I heard is about reminding ourselves to be in the moment, to allow yourself to be present. Another thing that I heard is getting into action, right? Whether it was with the tiles or whatever, actually getting out and doing aerobics, being able to allow ourselves to feel again, and just getting into action. And another thing that really struck me is this sort of reinventing our environment. Our environment is so important, that physical environment we create for ourselves, and sort of getting rid of the clutter, both from the mind and physically, and creating a new space. But also, it sounds like you really had that sense of purpose, that you wanted to celebrate his life. And I think that advice, not just, and for our listeners out there, not just in situations of suicide or the loss of a loved one, but I think any trauma or crisis that you're dealing with, or just generally in your life, this is great advice, right? To stay on the path, stay in the moment, find your passion and purpose, get into action, and be mindful about your environment. And you mentioned stories a couple of times. I know you often speak and teach about unearthing the stories about your loved ones. I'd love if you could share, like, what does that mean? How do we do it? And what's the impact of that?
well, Cindy, what I did, because I had the tools of a psychotherapist now and the insights that I'd never had as just a mom, I had tools that most parents never have. And I especially appreciated learning back when I was getting my degrees, learning about Erik Erikson, because he described the key issues at every single stage of life, that if you lead to them, they will help the child thrive at every age, and it keeps rebooting life in a new way at every single developmental level, all the way to the end. But if you don't know them, there are dangers at each one as well. And if you don't lead to them, you can innocently fall into a place where you're demoralizing the kids throughout life. And if they start that process, it can just capitalize into exactly what happened with John. And so with that insight, I went back and over every single moment that he lived, and I looked for what he would say are the story, what his story would be, not mine, because obviously mine were wrong.
Yeah.
But his stories were what I had to find. And as I found them, I found that I could see exactly how he slowly but surely kept falling. As we looked at a rocket ship going straight up, inside he was hollowing out.
Yeah.
And I didn't see that. It's not visible.
Yeah.
And as long as, if you don't know what the issues are, you are basically in a random function. You can hit or miss. You don't know. But if you know, then you know much more about what to do and how to do it.
Yeah.
And that really shrinks the error of measurement around our decisions with our regard to our children. And we can definitely keep life on track and worth the living throughout life. And that's what I realized one of my son's purposes is to help others survive what he didn't. He's a cautionary tale, and but he was such a triumph in his life, Cindy. I couldn't see him as a tragedy.
Yeah.
And I couldn't say goodbye to him. I could never, ever say goodbye to him. And because I haven't, I feel that he and I are on this mission together. I feel his presence many times. I have a ton of stories about that, but whether they're accurate or not doesn't make any difference to me. But what matters is nothing in itself is bad or horrible. What's bad is if you do nothing about it.
And you really struck a chord with me, something you said there, Sally, when you talked about his story and looking at it from his stories, the way he would tell them, because you'd said, because mine were obviously wrong. And I really want to put a pin in that, because I think that applies to all of the negotiations in our life, personally and professionally, and not even about right or wrong. I think I think you've unearthed something really profound there, which is it's all about perspective, right? Just surrendering our ego and making it about the other person. And in your case, you did it posthumously, but what a gorgeous gift for our listeners to know going forward, when you are navigating relationships, when you are negotiating those relationships in your life, to be able to surrender that ego and always be looking from the perspective of the other party. How are they perceiving this? How are they receiving this? What is their story? Because so often we think we're being well-intentioned, but as you said, we can be demoralizing and we won't even know we're hitting those triggers. So
absolutely.
I love that.
He has been the most incredible teacher I could ever have had. His little brother also has done something similar in a very different way.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it was so amazing. When I gave birth to him, Cindy, I was the first natural childbirth in Santa Barbara.
Wow.
Which you don't want to be.
Good point.
They were not ready for me. They were not interested in me having a natural childbirth. They didn't enjoy me screaming through the hospital and destroying the ambiance. And
that's so funny.
But I ended up having a natural anyway. And the moment I saw him being lifted above my half moon of belly, the strangest thought came to me. It was not my thought. It was like an announcement. It was, here is the one who will teach you all you need to know.
Wow.
And I thought, no, parents teach their children. And I was like, what's that about?
Oh,
But somehow or another, he came to teach.
yeah. You're
And
giving me goosebumps. My middle child, my oldest boy, had been diagnosed early in COVID with a serious mental health issue. And I remember somebody saying to me at one point, I'd met them and we were having a very brief conversation. All of a sudden he stopped and closed his eyes and he said, "You have a child who's struggling right now, or you feel that he's struggling, but he is here to teach you what you need to know." And it just, so when you said that, I just got goosebumps. And on that, I know you coach at-risk and genius students on skills that they don't learn in school. And I'd love if you could share what some of those skills are, because I do think our educational system is very skewed and seemingly getting more so. So I'd love your perspectives on that, Sally.
well, this also ties in with what he taught me, because I had to do such an incredible anthropological dig of our whole lives. And one of the things was that nobody in schools are learning anything about emotional intelligence,
Yeah.
which is what is associated with success in life and happiness.
Yeah.
Not IQ, that doesn't do it. It's emotional intelligence that creates happiness and success. And so when after his death, one of the things I thought is I have to be part of the solution. And so I became a Toastmaster, and part of Toastmasters is also doing things out in the community. And I started doing these classes where you teach kids by invitation, teacher invitation. You come into classrooms and you basically create a Toastmasters class. But what we're teaching is emotional intelligence,
Yeah.
like critical thinking, like listening skills. So important.
Yeah.
How to say critical things in a way people will say thank you
Yeah.
instead of polarizing.
Yeah.
Talking about how to speak powerfully, how to use nonverbal communication, learning how to read nonverbal communication. All these different skills that are not, and how to self-regulate your emotions, how to do hard things and feel, and take little tiny steps into your discomfort zone and keep growing, and how to have a whole class bond, which in ways that you never see
Yeah.
happen anymore.
Yeah.
And it was all the things John would have kept him alive. If he had had those skills, he would still be here. And I don't want anyone else to make that kind of a horrible life destroying decision that will only destroy so many others around them, as well. I want to be the part of the solution, and I'm here on earth. I feel like I've been given life and maybe continuity to basically do as much as I can to help people survive and thrive and move through life in a positive way that ends up in a triumph.
Mm-hmm.
Triumph. Do this.
I love that. What a beautiful gift to be able to give back with that mission out of your personal tragedy. I think that's gorgeous. And Sally, as you're speaking, like, oh my gosh, it so resonates with much of what you're describing. And I hadn't really thought of it as EQ when I started, but all of the things you were just describing were in large part the reason I started with the art of feminine negotiation. It's about, we are not taught to listen in North America. And in fact, we do not listen very well. We're probably one of the worst cultures for that. And we're always coming from that ego-driven place, and we're waiting for our turn to speak. And we don't allow ourselves the grace and the space to truly share and to come from a place of empathy and try to understand other people's perspective. I think it's one of the reasons the world is so out of balance now. And I'd love your thoughts, because one of the things that really triggered for me is we've been so conditioned to define success based on a very competitive, sort of more masculine model, sort of all about me, win or lose mentality. And I certainly have been on a mission to reframe that. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you define success generally in life.
Well, success to me is living a vibrant life every moment of your life, all of your life, and to end up in a way that you feel absolutely at peace with. You look back and you feel like, yeah, there's been mistakes, but I learned and I grew, and I am so very, very fulfilled and I feel at peace with whatever happens. And I have people in my life, in my relatives, who are like that. And so I can see that you can absolutely live a life that is going to make such a difference, and also be something that you can just be proud of and learn and grow and make mistakes, and it's all good, but you do something about it. You don't ever let anything take you down. You take it as a lesson, and you learn the lesson, and you live the solutions, and you can do that at every age, and there's no end to that. And then you walk out of life at peace, and you are an icon for everyone else.
Yeah.
And that's really important. And that's a choice we can make every step of the way, Cindy.
Yeah.
We can make that choice. And one of the things that I'm really upset about the school systems, because they're creating competition and conflict with the kids by grading on the curve.
Yeah.
That is, it just pits the kids against each other, where there's a few edges, like my son, who end up being bullied to pieces because they're raising the curve. They can't, that's the only way the kids can neutralize them is outside of school, or by just demoralizing them. And John certainly took incredible heat.
Yeah. And it's not even just the grades. Like as you were saying that, I remember our kids in grade 8 for, again, my middle son. And then the same thing happened with my youngest at their elementary school for their grade 8, their last year, when they had, how you have track and field and there's a big competition. And again, it's all about winning and losing, pitting against each other. And I thought it was the most gorgeous thing, but he came home and they were in big, with his head hung. They had been called up to the mat in the principal's office because there were only 4 boys in that grade 8 graduating class. And they decided that they would go on their 800-meter race or whatever it was. They linked arms so that they would cross the finish line together as this gorgeous testament to their friendship and a celebration of collaboration. And the principal went bananas, screaming at them through the megaphone, run your race, and then called them all in the principal's office, told them they were going to have to come and apologize to the school the next day. And I just had a fit. And I said, if she's going to make you speak to the school the next day and she wants a speech, you write how you felt, the reasons why you did it. And then she wouldn't let them speak when she found out they were going to do that. So and oh my gosh, everything that you just said, I mean, I'm a big advocate of negotiating our best lives and seeing those choices we make as a negotiation in our life. And I was going to ask you for some tips on how to negotiate better lives, and you just gave us a masterclass on that. So,
I mean, honestly, there's another way to grade, and it's called criterion reference testing. And you're basically pitted against only yourself.
Yeah.
Everyone can get an A if they put in the work. Why aren't we teaching to that? Because that would take out so much of the competition that is becoming bullying, turning into bullying. And that is what is creating the school shootings as well, because you've got alienated, angry, hopeless people who have a lot of potential, but they're not being recognized and they're being sidelined. And that is creating a lot of the negativity that we're seeing today. And it's absolutely artificially created. And if we had criterion reference testing, I had one class in college with criterion reference testing, and everybody loved each other. We all had fun together. We all talked together because there was no competition. And it was basically driving wedges between perfectly good people for no reason.
And ultimately, isn't it about showing up as the best versions of ourselves? That's what life should be about. Every day choosing to grow and learn and be the best versions of ourselves. It reminds me as you're saying that, because even when there is competition, we can still make that choice. Because I remember a negotiating course I took in law school where we were basically negotiating for our grades. And I wasn't aware of it at the time, Sally, but it wasn't until many years later I realized back then I was negotiating from a place of what I would call pure feminine power. I was collaborating. I came to every one of those negotiations saying, we've only got 50 minutes. What do you need? What can I do for you? Tell me about it. It was an incredibly collaborative process. And I won virtually every negotiation that year using that approach. And yet then you start the practice of law, and everything we're conditioned is to take the opposite approach. Now, I want to make sure we have time to, I can't believe how quick this is going here. I know you were a principal in the award-winning documentary Dialogue Project, and that tweaked my interest. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, well, Cindy, when my son died, I had a roommate in it living in his own bedroom because I needed to pay his way through Carnegie Mellon. And the only way I could do it was to rent his own room out. And the young man who moved in was 18 years old, and he was as bright as John. I mean, he was really like, he was very different than John, but the same caliber.
Yeah.
And we bonded the very first night he was in. I won't tell you the story because you don't have time, but it's hysterical. We talked till 4 a.m.
Wow.
And every night after that, we would talk till 4 a.m. again.
Wow.
He lived with me a total of 8 years. In the meantime, he went to Berkeley and graduated with honors, came back and moved back in.
What?
And anyway, he became my biggest supporter. He really became, it was like John had sent him to me to help me survive loss. And so
Wow.
Mike would call me from Berkeley every Sunday and spend like 2 hours just making sure I was okay. And without him, I wouldn't be here. And so he really was an incredible support. And it's been over 32 years, and I'm going to be seeing him this weekend in Palm Springs. And he tried to kill himself about 3 times.
Wow.
And I caught him every single time. And I was like, oh, no, you don't.
Yeah.
And anyway, I kept saying, you're rare. You're going to find the love you want, but you have to understand that you're a rare bird, and somebody has to be a rare bird to be with you.
Yeah.
And he found that person, and they're happily married, and it's fabulous. But anyway, he was the one who became, among other things, he's a sculptor, he's an artist, he's an activist, and he wanted to help people come back together out in public spaces. And so Dialogue Project was his idea. And what he did is he put quotes all over huge screens from Madonna to Buddha, and all in different font sizes, and the wisdom of the ages, basically,
Yeah.
all on these giant screens. And we took them all around the United States, and I was a principal in that documentary, and I was basically Lucy in the 5-cent box at the table where everybody was searching. And they didn't know they were talking to a psychologist, but
Yeah.
they were. And there were many people who were in a very bad moment, and I would be able to talk to them and really help them. That wasn't part of the documentary. They never filmed me, but anyway, it's really great for me because I was able to ad hoc work with people all over the world, and it was fabulous. I loved it. And the quotes would help people rise out of their moment into a higher level of feeling and thinking, and they would start talking among each other, and then things would happen. So we filmed that, and we won some awards in film festivals. And it worked. It really worked. And people started talking to each other just ad hoc, spontaneously, and people would never ever talk to each other and normally were. And it bring people back together again. And so that was what the documentary was about.
Oh, thanks for sharing. It really tweaked me. I thought it was beautiful, beautiful concept, and I was thrilled to see that it did so well. And you mentioned about people coming in sort of a troubled place, often when you were Lucy at the 5-cent table there. And certainly I know it's like suicide rates, depression, anxiety, all on the rise, sadly. COVID certainly has exacerbated that. I'd love if you could share maybe just some tips for our listeners on how to negotiate past that, whether suicidal ideation or just for people who are suffering right now. What advice would you give to someone who's struggling out there today?
Well, right now we're in a very tough moment, politically, economically, every which way we're being assailed. And it's the most important time to be alive, I believe. One of those, moments, critical mass moment, that we need people to step up and realize that this is just a moment.
Yeah.
It's not forever, but we have to step up, and the hard things are to work through, and you'll never be at that level again. You'll always be pumped to a different, higher level. You have to go through the difficult moments to rise beyond what you even could imagine happening. Please give yourself that opportunity. Nothing is here to destroy you. It's to make you. It's to make you. It's to help you find how much resilience you can capacitize to. It helps you grow and become, and there's no limit. but you have to stay alive, and don't let one or two negative things just make any difference. Those are opportunities to overcome, and you will rise because of them. You turn them into a gift for yourself and for others. You don't ever give up on life. That's not the message.
Yeah.
It's just do something about it.
Beautiful. And I agree with you. I think this is one of those really transformational times. I think 100 years from now, people are going to look back and recognize this period in history as being a profound economic shift, a profound shift in how the world operates, and seeing that as a potential gift, and how we navigate that perspective is such a beautiful way to approach it. Tell us a little bit about your book, Sally. I love the title. I think it's a gorgeous gift to the world. So share a little bit about that for us.
First of all, if you don't mind, I'd like to just kind of add on what you just said.
Sure.
My son, my youngest son, was always in the shadow of a genius. At his funeral, my son and I were in the car, and we were driving, and he said, "You know, Mom, as long as John was alive, I knew I was part of a really smart family."
Oh.
But he had always felt persecuted by his brother. And he actually, when he went to school, they put him in special ed because he had learned not to talk.
Yeah.
Because his brother would just put him down. And so he remained marginal. And he was in special ed for like 2 years, but he finally tested out, but he stayed marginal after that because he'd lost 2 regular years of school. At 14, he quit school, despite everything I could do.
Yeah.
Became the biggest truant San Marcos High School ever had.
Yeah.
And every day I'd get the call from San Marcos and go flying out of my job and go flying past the high school to the beach in Santa Barbara, because where else is a truant in Santa Barbara? And I'd patrol the perimeter and looking for my truant son and never find him and have to go back to work. Mad. And anyway, what I didn't know though, Cindy, is my son was taking his brother's messages to heart. He got a book called Getting Straight A's, and that's what he took to the beach every day. Is getting straight A's. And he read and he read and reread it. And when he went back to school the next year, he went from a 1 to a 4.
Wow.
Maintained it through City College, went on to Cal Poly in aeronautical design engineering.
Yeah.
Graduated with an offer from Lockheed, turned them down, saying, "I don't want to be an engineer." "Well, what do you want to do?" He says, "I want to model virtual reality with the computer geniuses." And I said, "Brett, if you've done what you just did, you can do anything you want." And so he took a minor in computer science. And a few years later, Cindy, he was head of all 3 Lord of the Rings virtual effects.
Wow. That's amazing. Love that.
That's my stupid one.
And it's funny you say that, because, and again, just sort of quickly, this idea about comparison. I mean, so often we beat ourselves up, and people are living in pain because they're comparing themselves to other people. And they almost never have an accurate representation of what that person's life is like. But also, we don't get our value externally. It's got to come from inside. It has to be that unconditional self-love. And we are not taught that. So,
no. And it's not about it. And every single person is an example of what you can be too.
Absolutely.
It's not either or. It's you can be that too. And when my son said, when he knew that, John proved that he was part of a really smart family, initially he didn't think he was smart, but then he realized he had it. He had the genetics. And so that's what gave him the ability to say, well, I need to learn how to learn.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that. Not either or. It's like that difference between scarcity and abundance mindset. So tell us quickly about your book, and then I'm going to have to ask our last question and wrap it up here. That I could be talking to you for all day. There's so many gold nuggets here. So tell us a little bit about your book so people can go out and grab it.
Okay. Well, The Son I Knew Too Late is meant for everyone to avoid what happened to my son, in a way that will help them be able to keep life worth the living throughout life. And so I take it basically at each age. I have a story about my son that's true. All of it is true. There's not a single lie in the thing. And then I go into Erik Erikson's analysis of what is going on so the reader can see exactly
Yeah.
what undermined my son and what can undermine others like him, and what could, and then also talk about what you lead to so that and so you're learning at every age what needs to be focused on internally, because this is the internal growth part of the child as they
Love it.
grow. And this will help you, and you can go back and use it on your own life as well, and do a retrospective and see where things went a little awry, and
Yeah.
you can fix it. You can absolutely fix it. Grandparents, everybody needs to read this book.
Great message. Don't give us all the tips. Make sure people go out there to read it. So that's fantastic. And where is it available? Where can people get your book?
Well, it's on Amazon. You can order
Perfect.
it through any outlet, really, very much.
Awesome.
Or on my website too, as well.
Beautiful. And go ask your local bookstore for it. I'm always a big advocate of trying to get those books into local bookstores too. So for our listeners there, go ask for the book. And I'd like to end normally by asking, what is one of the greatest mindset shifts you've had in your life? And you've already shared so many with us, and this doesn't have to even be on this issue, Sally, just one of those moments where you had that aha and looked at things differently than you had before.
Well, Cindy, I'm going to be 80 this year.
I can't believe it.
And I've been a therapist now for 32 years, and I absolutely adore what I do. And there is no way I am going to retire or anything like that. I'm just getting started, Cindy.
I love
I
that.
have a lot to do before I go, and I'm not going to go out gently.
It's so good. And where can our listeners learn more about you, Sally? Where would you direct them?
Well, probably to my website, sallyaraymond.com. But anybody want to call or anything, send me a message. I would be love to talk to them, because I've lived long enough, and hopefully I have some wisdom.
That's so beautiful. You definitely have shared some of that with us today. I wish we had more time. We'll have to get you back, and we'll make sure to put all that info in our show notes for our listeners. Be sure to look for that. And thank you so much for joining, Sally, and sharing this heart-wrenching and yet heartwarming and inspirational story with us. I really appreciate having you here.
I can't tell you how much I appreciated you, Cindy. This is great.
And for our listeners out there, I'm sure you got lots of value from this. I really, really invite you to re-listen, take it deep in your heart, and practice it. So often we just take in information. I really invite you to put some of these tips you got here today into action so that you can negotiate your best life. And make sure to subscribe if you haven't already subscribed to the podcast, and share this with anyone else that you think could value from these messages. And before we sign off, just want to share a few ways that we can work together if you are looking to up-level your negotiation skills to negotiate your best life. I have everything from online to group to my mastermind and VIP experiences available so that you can better leverage your innate power to get more of what you want and deserve in life. And if that sounds interesting, check us out at artoffemininenegotiation.com, and make sure to grab my book, theartoffemininenegotiation.com, as well. And that is a wrap for this episode. Until next time, go forth and negotiate your best life on your terms so you can stop missing out and start getting more of what you want and deserve from the boardroom to the bedroom. Until next time, take care.